You're listening to Symposium, a year-round conference in the arts, brought to you by Pipeline Artists.
Welcome to our one-on-one with Jane Friedman. Jane has spent nearly 25 years working in the book publishing industry, with a focus on author education and trend reporting. She is the editor of The Hot Sheet, the essential publishing industry newsletter for authors, and was named Publishing Commentator of the Year by Digital Book World in 2023. Her latest book is The Business of Being a Writer, University of Chicago Press, which received a starred review from Library Journal, and the second edition will be available in the spring. In addition to serving on grant panels for the National Endowment for the Arts and the Creative Work Fund, she works with organizations such as the Writers Guild to bring transparency to the business of publishing. And welcome, Jane Friedman. If everyone was here, there would be this rousing applause. Yay, Jane!
Thank you.
So I am going to start off by saying to you guys, I did a huge, long, in-depth interview of Jane on the Pipeline Artist site called The Book of Jane, and where we go deep into her childhood. There might be a mention of underoos, and it's a very fun interview and very candid interview, and I'm going to link to that so you guys can listen to that, and read that rather. But I really want to get to your questions pretty quickly because this is a great opportunity for you to talk to Jane. Before we go into that, I just want to do a quick sort of recap of that AI craziness that happened to you.
Sure.
Where someone tried to take over Jane's identity, name, persona, and publish AI books on Amazon, trying to profit off of her success and work. And she was all over every news network. And I even took a screenshot of one and sent it to her. I was like, what's happening? So just because I'm sure people are going to ask about AI. So if you can just do a quick little maybe update on what is happening, and if you think that there's ways that authors now can protect themselves, or maybe better ways that will be coming down the pike of how authors can protect themselves.
Yeah, so I'll just start with the caveat that the space is moving very quickly. So if you're watching this recording months from now, I can't promise that any of it still matters.
True.
So let's just say that currently the media, and I include book publishers in that, are trying to negotiate licensing agreements with the really big AI companies. So that would include OpenAI. That's the company behind ChatGPT, which most of us are familiar with, I think. It includes Google, Meta, which is Facebook, and other companies that are really kind of trying to profit off of this over the long term. So what does licensing mean? It means that companies from The Atlantic to News Corp to Forbes, even some educational publishers like Taylor and Francis, most recently, they're allowing these companies to train on materials. Now, this isn't indefinite training. There are usually some guardrails around it, like these licenses have to be renewed. But my read on it is that the AI companies have realized number one, I think they're trying to reduce their legal exposure because the courts haven't yet determined whether or not the training that's happened without licensing is actually legal. The courts will eventually figure that out. So the companies are moving ahead with licensing agreements and paying a lot of money, like millions and millions of dollars, for training because they really need high quality materials to help them with the next stage of advancement for their businesses. So that's the high level. So I think in one sense, like a year ago, the question might have been, how do authors protect themselves? I think the question has changed to, how much money are you going to get? Because I think the companies realize they can't. There's still this original sin of them training on materials they didn't have rights to. But I do think that will get sorted out in the courts. They're not going to get shut down. If anyone's hoping for that, I'm sorry, it's not going to happen. But there will be money extracted. And so I do have a further article here where I kind of wrote up just recently where we're at right now. And I don't think I know there's a lot of doom and gloom around this, but I'm not one of those people. I am fairly optimistic that issues will get sorted out. And I treat it currently as a tool like any other.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be a lot of innovation around it. There's going to be a lot of fraud around it. And
Mm-hmm.
we'll get through to the other end. And I think it will become part of the standard publishing process and writing process for that matter.
Okay, so there's probably a lot of our audience. There's authors who are at various stages of their career, but there are also some screenwriters out there who have never written a novel and they don't know anything about the publishing industry. And if you could go back in time to yourself in the beginning when you didn't know anything about the publishing industry, like what would be your advice to them be in terms of diving into this unknown world?
Regardless of the type of writer who comes to me, especially if they're in their early stages, early months, first manuscript period, I usually counsel patience because the first thing you produce, even the first 5 things you produce, whatever that means to you, could be your first 5
Mm-hmm.
manuscripts, first 5 projects, first 5 ideas. They normally don't go anywhere. So there's a really, and also book publishing just moves so slowly.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think the TV and film industry might be one industry, they might actually move more slowly. I don't know.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
um,
It's all
but
subjective.
but book publishing is, I and again, I have a hard time comparing it to screenwriting because
Mm-hmm.
my knowledge could fit on a Q-tip with it when it comes to Hollywood. Although BoJack Horseman is bringing me up to date, I have to say, maybe a little bit, sort of. It's an older series.
Oh, I have a friend who used to write on that show.
Okay. Book publishing, just like any other industry, and especially I'm sure this applies to Hollywood, it has fashions and trends and it's responding to
Mm-hmm.
what's happening in the marketplace. And just because you have this idea that you've been sitting on for 20 years, maybe it would have worked 20 years ago, but it might not work today. And I see that happen
Mm.
again and again and again. People are sitting on projects or ideas that they've written or half written or revised a million times. They're still trying to sell them. And I just really push them, please pick up a new project, start something
Yeah.
fresh. Because the ideas you generated 5 years ago or 20 years ago, or that star in your eye when you were a kid, it may not have relevance right now.
Yeah.
There's a conference I go to, the Midwest Writers Workshop, almost every year since 2003. I've only missed one. I missed some pandemic years in there, and I still see the same people coming back trying to push the same projects. And I'm like, you've got to move on. You can't get
Mm.
stuck.
Yeah. I think that's a hard thing in screenwriting too. There's, there's certain projects that keep pulling you back in too, that you can't seem to escape. Um, so Kimberly asked, what's your number one tip for new authors to get traditionally published? And this sort of piggybacks on that idea. And then I'd also like you to touch on when to cry uncle and try self-publishing.
So for traditional publishing, I would say there's this decision that every writer has to make. How much are you going to write to market or to trends, or I should say consider the market, because I would never suggest writing to market or writing to trends. But how much are you going to consider the market? So what I mean by that is currently romance, romantasy, horror, these are genres where you're going to have a much easier time achieving some liftoff. If you're trying to sell something in a genre that's not as, that's having some tough times, that would be like children's middle grade. I might say, well, the prevailing winds are not going in your direction. So are you willing to think about another type of project? Or if you just have themes or issues in your book that just aren't resonating with the zeitgeist, are you willing to try a project that ties more directly into what's culturally relevant at the moment? And this kind of echoes what I just said before. It's not that you can't write the book of your heart or that you can't put art first or any of those things. But if you go to Publishers Marketplace, and for those who don't know what this site is, it's where all the deals, well, not all, but a good number of deals, the publishing deals get announced, and it tells you the agent who sold it, the editor who bought it, and there's like a 1 or 2 sentence description of the book. And if you with discipline, read those deal announcements, let's say for even just a couple weeks. And it's not much reading, 1 or 2 sentences about a book. It's going to open your eyes to the sorts of projects that sell right now. You're going to see recurring themes. You're going to see authors who come from particular walks of life, that have particular platforms. In the case of nonfiction, you can see what sort of platforms publishers are gravitating toward. You can see the sorts of twists that are catching publishers' eye. And then you can start to compare it. Now, is my book really living up to what these other books are accomplishing in just a sentence or two? Part of this, if you're a screenwriter, like I imagine being able to come up with high concept ideas is something that you have some knowledge of, what that means. Whereas I think people who come from a more literary background struggle with that. What is a high concept idea, in fact? But it's essentially something I would like your take on this, Jeannie, but I try to tell writers from a literary background, it's something where you can get interest with one sentence. Like the premise is so intriguing or exciting, you can practically sell it with the sentence.
Yeah. Thinking like we have a logline workshop that we do every quarter. And the logline in the screenwriting world is the most important thing in your query. Like I would even argue it's almost like the only thing you need to put in the email. Right. Like they will look right at the logline and make a decision right then and there. So there's the art of having a high concept idea, but there's also the art of knowing how to articulate that. Yeah. And condensing down your whole idea into 1 or 2 sentences is a very difficult thing. And it can sometimes feel harder than writing the whole entire screenplay, and when I see you are the query letter expert, one of, and query letters for publishing are very different than screenwriting. I mean, word count, genre, comps, all of that. I mean, maybe speak a little about comps. I think that's something that a lot of writers struggle with. What are my comps? And maybe part of why they're struggling is they're not reading enough, or how does the agent even know this book? Like, how's the agent supposed to know all these books?
Right. Right. So this is a really great segue from what we just discussed, because if you do want to get traditionally published, aside from looking at those deals, immersing yourself in what's being currently published. And I'm not talking about bestsellers necessarily, although read those. You should see what's sitting on top of the bestseller list. You should read probably a Colleen Hoover book or a Rebecca Yarros book, and see which authors are at the top. But whatever it is you're shooting for, even if you haven't read every comp out there, and you can't, you need to be able to talk with an agent or a publisher about where your work fits in the spectrum of contemporary literature. This is why it's so dangerous to start talking in your query about a bestseller from the 1970s or the 1980s or the 1990s, because that was a different time, a different place, and people had different interests, or like it's a different zeitgeist. Now, I do see sometimes agents will, in my opinion, overly emphasize how recent the comps need to be. Like they'll get so specific. Oh, it can only be published within this like 18-month time frame, and it only can have between 1,000 and 10,000 Amazon reviews, and it has to be above a 4-star rating. And it's like this checklist you will never ever be able to fulfill. I would throw that out the window. What we're really looking for is, are you conversant with what's being published in your category? Can you talk about your work in relation to what other people are doing? Because those are the people, you hope, that you're going to be on panels with at book festivals, or you're going to be blurbing each other's books, or you're going to be chatting on social media, or you're going to be in that New York Times best 100 books of the whatever it was. And I do think, especially when you're producing art, I would hope that you're producing it in conversation in society and culture. You need to know what's being done in order to put something in there that's going to resonate.
Yeah, and also maybe a little different, like not that's been done 20,000 times before. With comp titles, there was an article that you had on your site, and I I don't think you wrote it, I think somebody else wrote it, about using Chat GPT to help you find comp
Mhm.
titles.
Yeah.
And that's the one time that I've used it. That was the first time I tried. And I said, I told it find something mid list, like, certainly not wanting to compare whatever I was writing with something that's a New York Times bestseller. And I asked the question a lot of different ways, had it
Mhm.
spit out things, and then I compared the lists and whatever books were common amongst all the different lists, I started reading those books. So I did it more for my own edification of other books that were out there in that genre that I would like to write in, you know. That way, GPT was very helpful. That's the only thing I've ever tried.
Yeah.
Yeah, it did.
If there's so many ways to find your comps, even if you're not avidly reading, and I would suggest maybe you should be avidly reading, but if you're not, some other tools you can look at, which I'll find the article at my site here in a second, but there's something called Literature Map. That's really fun to use to help find your comps. You can go, there's a library tool that they use, like librarians use, for what's
Mm-hmm.
called readers advisory. This is when they try to help their patrons find another book or another author that they'll love.
Mm-hmm.
So, librarians have their own database for figuring this out, and you can have access to it as
Oh,
well,
cool.
typically through your library.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another way, although the comps you find might be a little older. But also just having a
Mm-hmm.
conversation with a librarian or a bookseller, you should be developing relationships with those people if you want to be a traditionally published author anyway. So
Yeah.
talk with them about what's happening and what they're seeing in the market and who they think your comps might be based on a description of your work.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Kim asked a question that I'll rephrase a little differently because it probably applies to a few different people. Her agent has tried to, with the two novels that she's written, to get out to, she'd put them on sub. They've been rejected, hasn't been able to traditionally publish, and it's been almost 3 years, and hasn't had any luck. And should I bite the bullet and self-publish, which she dreads, but should I go ahead and also should she go ahead and make her own audiobook?
I'm going to set the audiobook question aside
Mm-hmm.
and just focus on this question of, if you can't gain any traction with traditional publishers, when should you decide to self-publish? So much here
Mm-hmm.
depends on your career goals and what's going to satisfy you. Like, there are quite a number of people I've counseled to self-publish because they keep hitting the wall with, even if they have an agent. Um, and I feel like they're just waiting to be given permission to move ahead with their careers. They're in stasis. And I think it's very frustrating. And our lives are not, we're not immortal here. But, one of the challenges I have to admit is, if you're self-publishing something that's not genre fiction, if you're self-publishing something that's not in a series, if you're self-publishing the sort of book where you're trying to get tenure as a professor, self-publishing ain't going to really help you there. So I think, if you look at the self-publishing market, the most successful authors tend to write in those key commercial genres: romance, mystery, thriller, fantasy, romantasy, paranormal. I could go on.
Mm-hmm.
And they tend to write in a series. So if you're doing like a memoir, what I would call upmarket fiction, this would be the sorts of books picked up by Reese Witherspoon's book club. If you're doing more literary work, then you might be disappointed because you're not going to get the New York Times to pay attention to your book. You're not going to get the important literary people to pay attention to your book. On the flip side of that, I would say there was actually just an article about this in Lee Stein's Attention Economy. I think it was over the weekend or even today. I'm going to put it into the chat. I think it's free for everyone. It's called Destigmatizing Self-Publishing. And it's specifically about literary authors self-publishing. I think it can be done successfully, but I think most people are too scared. They're too concerned, in my opinion, with prestige and status, and their goals are probably just wrapped up in acceptance in a particular kind of community. But I can't talk people out of that. Like, if that's what you want, it's what you want. But I think there's a lot of room for even literary authors to succeed on their own terms, but they have to be interested in actually engaging directly with their readers. Now, I think that's true for every author, but it's just, that hits you in the face more more quickly and dramatically when you're self-publishing.
Yeah. And maybe self-publish that book that you've been pitching for 20 years and no one wants, just to get it out of your system.
Well, that also,
is there a downside to that?
I don't think there's zero downside, in my opinion. Like, it's not going to hurt your chances on your next project. And it makes me sad that people see self-publishing as not the inherently creative, innovative, bold act that it is, to be able to say, this will be enough and I can actually get meaningful attention for it without someone else standing behind it. You absolutely can. Like, there are more tools today than there have ever been for you to be able to gain traction with that. You just have to have the confidence and patience with yourself to do it. The other advantage that self-publishers have is that their book doesn't have this 3-month window in which it has to succeed after launch, which that's a lot of pressure that traditional authors feel to get the book rolling really quickly after the release while the publisher is actually still answering your emails and phone calls. Because, traditionally published authors want that book to do well enough that they're going to get the second deal, or, you don't want to get dropped, right? So self-publishing authors don't have that burden. You can take as long as you need to take to get attention for it. It can be a real slow burn, and every single book you produce after that first one just adds fuel to the fire, because the more books you have, the easier it is to achieve traction.
Yeah. And you have to do so much, even traditionally publishing. Yeah. You have to do so much of your own marketing yourself anyway. And it is like being your own little business as a self-publisher. We have a side plug. We have a self-publishing, very good, incredibly thorough self-publishing symposium that's on demand. I'll put the link in it. And also, anytime Jane drops a link in the chat, I'm copying it to put in the recording email. So don't panic, you'll get it. Oh, audiobooks. So somebody's also asking if the audiobooks, like, how important are the audiobooks? And that's a whole other question in terms of contracts and keeping rights and all of that. But they specifically asked, would you recommend that an author narrate their own?
No. Unless you're a professional audiobook narrator, then yes, you should. I know that was a really quick answer without any nuance, but let me pull back and say that audiobooks are a huge growth area for traditional publishing. I think there are still some barriers for self-publishing authors. It's complicated. I won't get into the weeds. But expense is one of the biggest barriers unless you're using AI to narrate the audiobook. And I see that's being done more often. Amazon is starting to allow that sort of thing for self-publishing authors, but I don't want to get too far on a tangent. So if you're traditionally publishing, the publisher is pretty much going to take those audiobook rights and probably release the audiobook alongside that hardcover or ebook or paperback. In some cases, especially with university presses, it might be that they will sell the rights to an audiobook publishing company. That's what happened to me, since I am indeed with a university press. And so that was sold to a company I'm not even going to remember. Oh, Tantor. It was sold to Tantor Audio. If you're self-publishing and want to do the audiobook edition, what I see happening in the market is actually audiobook authors, if they can attract the attention of one of these independent audiobook firms, they typically will do a deal that way. Podium Audio would be probably the best example. That company started off by striking audiobook deals with self-publishing authors, and they've since branched out into print and ebook as well, because the authors want publisher support. Turns out publisher support can be nice. Especially when you're selling, when you reach a certain level where you're selling lots and lots and lots, you tend to need more and more support. So in any event, I would not narrate your own audiobook unless you've had professional training. There's some exceptions perhaps for memoir, but even Britney Spears didn't narrate her own audiobook.
Oh, that would have been interesting. And I've actually been listening to audiobooks a lot lately. It's I've just discovered them. I'm very late to this party. But when you get a great narrator, like I just recently listened to The Eight, which was like a 25-hour audiobook, but the narration was amazing. It can be incredible, but when you get a narrator who doesn't give a different cadence to the different characters, and then these two characters have the same cadence or having a conversation, you have no idea who's talking. It can be absolutely painful to listen to a book that's not done well. One thing that we actually have an audiobook narrator who's going to be a podcast guest and coming up, and I'll let you all know when that happens. But I'm fascinated to talk to her. She's an actor. So a lot of times actors, they know how to do different accents, different characters, all that stuff. So if you were self-published and you wanted to do your own, find some actors.
Yeah.
Might be a good way to do it.
Yes. The number one reason people stop listening to an audiobook and return it or don't buy it is they hate the narrator. So always remember that.
And listen to the sample before you buy it.
Yeah.
So Amanda asked, how can a writer tell if the agent rejects based on a bad query or that the sample pages were bad? Because they usually maybe don't necessarily say.
Right. Yeah. If they're sending you a form rejection, there isn't really any way to know, but you might be able to detect patterns of response across multiple agents. So, for example, if you get really enthusiastic response from agents who just see the query and don't see the pages, then you know there's probably something in those pages that's given you problems. Also, just asking, friends, critique partners, other authors to take a look. I can rattle off, though, some things that happen in opening pages that kind of reliably are a turnoff. And I don't want to create anxiety for people, but here we go. Someone waking up to an alarm or just any general wake up scene that's just ordinary. Like there's no twist. It's just I'm getting up in the morning, I'm making my coffee, and I'm driving to work. The dream sequence. Oh, I woke up and it was a dream, the really big foreshadowing dream that has become very cliche. The person who's just kind of sitting, I call it the rocking chair scene, just kind of sitting and reminiscing on what has happened in the previous years of their life. There's nothing happening. The transit scene, where it's a plane, train, automobile, whatever, and they're on their way to something, reminiscing or thinking about whatever it is.
Angst about what they're about to go to.
Correct. So you probably see a pattern in some of this. Like we don't get the sense of why we're reading the story. There's often no interaction between whoever is that main character on the page and somebody else. So ideally, your first pages are also going to tie into whatever it is you expressed in the query that kind of sets up the tension or the premise or whatever is drawing us to this project. Hopefully the first pages give us a sense of how well you're going to execute that. If you do not mention the character who appears in the first pages in the query, you might want to think about, are you hobbling yourself? Is there any way to adjust? If you have a prologue that you're sending, maybe you should lop off that prologue and send the first chapter.
Yeah. Also, like I know when we read for contests at Book Pipeline, I read the whole, 5,000 words, because I found that most often what happens with authors, those first couple of chapters, they should just cut them out and start a little bit later, just the stuff that you're saying. So I make sure I keep reading, but an agent doesn't have the time to do that. And that's, for us, we're trying to discover some talent and help them get repped.
Right.
I do find that those first few are sometimes should be gone.
Yeah, I'll just add a little note about AI. So writers often ask me if I think that the slush pile will become kind of AI reviewed in the future. And they ask this with fear. And I'm like, this actually could benefit you because the AI will be able to read the entire manuscript in a split second and potentially, I don't know, tell the agent or editor, hey, this book is actually really good. If you ever were able to get to page 46, start there.
Yeah.
So that's fingers crossed. I hope that's
the thought. That's the thought. So I want to just kind of step back a little bit when I had mentioned about how book publishers, traditional publishers, don't necessarily do that kind of marketing that they used to do. Like they used to send them on book tours and, all that kind of stuff. Any tips on marketing and maybe some things that a writer could discuss with their publisher about a marketing plan? Like, anything like that. Like, what can they proactively do to maybe help get a little more assistance from the publisher?
Yeah, I actually have a really good post about this that I want to put into the
Okay,
chat.
good.
But
I'm just going to tell everybody, go read every article on Jane's site.
But yes, I will answer this question.
But I love articles. Thank you.
Probably the most important thing you can do if you have a traditional publishing deal is, and you may have an agent to help with this, which is good if you do, is to be proactive in asking your editor, who is the champion of your book inside the publishing house, proactively ask them every so often about how the marketing plan is taking shape, when they expect those marketing meetings to happen. And this happens earlier than most authors realize. So a lot of this will depend, of course, on how far ahead your book is signed from the release date. But if you're signed, let's say, just 1 year ahead of your release date, they're probably going to start that process immediately of figuring out the marketing piece, and which will inform the sales piece, which will inform so many other things. If you're 2 years out, then there'll probably be a little bit of time. But I just want to say, if you're an author on a nonfiction book, you got signed because you have a pretty nice platform, meaning you have a good email newsletter list, you speak and you teach, you have social media activity going on all the time. There could be more opportunities for you in marketing that book that need to be considered earlier in the process, maybe even 2 years in advance. So again, have a conversation with your agent, ask them when's the right time to start these conversations with my editor. It's possible you may be invited to some sort of meeting in person or via Zoom to talk with the sales and marketing team. Not always, but it's nice if you are. And I would say, if you don't have something tangible that's been shown or shared, I would say with it, like at the 9 to 12 month mark is when you need to be a little more pushy and asking about what's going on. And one good way to do that, to like get some real answers rather than the brush off, because publishers have this really bad tendency of like infantilizing authors or they're worried about sharing information that's not the information you want to hear. Like, oh, well, you're not an A-list book, we're not marketing it, go away. Like nobody wants to tell you that. So what you should do is put together your own marketing plan, even if you don't feel that confident about it. Start putting down some action points you can take, action steps you can take without the publisher's assistance. Look at what you could do if maybe you had a little bit of support from the publisher, like sending out advanced review copies to certain places or helping you with the logistics of a launch event in your hometown. Give that plan to your editor and say, this is what I'm thinking. I would love to know if you think this is realistic. I'm wondering if you can lend support in these areas. And then you're showing, look, I'm a proactive author. I'm going to be involved. I'm looking to see, what are you going to do or not do? And you have to be really clear on if they're just going to do the cookie cutter marketing plan, which is in that post I just shared at the bottom. The cookie cutter plan basically just says, we're going to send your book out for review to all the places they always send every book for review. It's going to be really generic about who they'll do outreach to, meaning they could use this plan for every book that they publish, because it has no specifics that would really speak to who they're going after, readership-wise, influencer-wise, for your title. So the other thing I'll mention is at some point you're going to get an author's questionnaire. It's going to ask you about everything that's ever happened in your life going back to childhood. It will maybe feel invasive. You'll be like, how do I even come up with this information? But the more you fill that out comprehensively, the better, because the publisher will be able to see opportunities in what you have listed. And you're probably going to bring forth information that they wouldn't have even considered marketing, but they see you list this special connection you have, and they're like, oh, we need to jump on that. That could be a big sales opportunity.
Yeah, like your story, the author's story. Right. When you were talking about the editor, working with the editor who works at the publishing house, somebody asked if you'd recommend that authors hire an editor before submitting to agents, or just self-editing.
I don't think it's required, and I don't think publishers expect it. However, you do have to put forward your absolute best effort. And if you submit something that you think isn't ready, or if you think there's a problem with it, if you know there's a flaw or a weakness, but you haven't figured out how to resolve it, then yes, I would say consider hiring an editor if it's within your budget. Just understand that no editor, no matter how good, no matter how much you pay, cannot promise that you're going to get an agent or that you're going to sell your book. So you have to be willing to make that investment in yourself as a writer, in advancing your knowledge and becoming better and understanding how to work through the problems in your manuscript. Don't make that investment because you think you're going to sell the book. I know that might be dark, but that's how I feel.
Yeah, that's understandable. And I've heard some people saying, like, maybe if you just want some help with those first pages, if they're asking for a partial submission, just but not the whole thing. Quite a few people have upvoted this question. I write in a variety of genres as well as stories that cross genres. How important is it to find an agent who's interested in the client's overall career, knowing their writer will not be pigeonholed? I know writers who have different agents for different genres, adult versus YA, etc. But aren't there drawbacks for taking things book by book with multiple agents?
I think we all have our own personal desires in this regard. So like my personal desire, I don't have an agent, but if I did, I would really only just want one agent, frankly. And I would want that agent to be interested in everything I was producing. And when I go querying agents, shopping around, I would have in the back of my head, I want someone who's going to be able to deal with me no matter what I produce. Is that realistic? It depends on what are all the different things I want to produce. But that would be my personal ideal. But I think it's totally valid to decide, look, let's say I've got this children's book that I want to do first, or I've got a selection of children's books that I want to do first. I have it in the back of my head that I'm going to also do some adult work, but that's just not my priority. And so I would just shop potentially for the agent who can do the best by those children's books and not worry too much about what's down the road. There are two reasons for that. One, the agent is going to have a conversation with you, I hope, about what your vision for your career. Like they are interested in that generally. At least my opinion is that most agents don't want to just sell one book and be done with you. They are generally they're interested in representing careers. At least, again, that's who I would be looking for. That's what I would want. And I think you can find one. So that's one reason. The other reason is that there may be a colleague at their agency that can handle the books that they don't want to or don't feel capable of handling, or they could refer you to someone who's, an agent buddy where they have a good collaborative relationship. So I wouldn't get too far ahead of yourself or, in that regard. There is something about the premise of this question that always concerns me when people say, I write in many different genres, because it's really rare that people will establish a career writing in many different genres. They will establish their career writing something that they become really well known for. And then because their, desirability increases out of that success, they then will have all sorts of other opportunities they can pursue in other genres, categories, whatever. Just like, let's say, I'll use Roxane Gay as an example. She published some books with small presses. I think there was a novel. There might have been a nonfiction book before she became a best-selling author. And then she came out with a couple books that got on the New York Times list. I think Bad Feminist might have been one, maybe Hunger. And then suddenly she was writing for TV shows, but what if she had started out saying, I'm going to do all of these different things at once? I just feel like it has the potential to slow your progress because you're not really focused on making headway in one area, mastering one area, becoming known for one area, and then letting that success, let's call it fame or celebrity, if you're really successful, help you attract opportunities to you. So I'm not saying don't be the Renaissance man or woman that you want to be. But you'll make your life so much easier if you say, this is what I'm doing, and this is what I want to be known for. Like right now, this is what I want on my tombstone. This is the mark I want to make, and decide what other things are really sideshows, at least for the moment. I don't want you to be pigeonholed, but at least for the moment, can you commit? Can you obsess about one thing before you obsess about everything?
Yeah. But I think also too, by writing those books that you're passionate about, pick the genre you're most passionate about and showing your agent, I can work really hard at this and I'm really collaborative and easy to work with. And then kind of maybe ease your agent into, hey, I'd like to try this, and they might be like, oh, you would be great at that.
Right.
Publishers Marketplace is also a fabulous place to do a bunch of research on agents who represent lots of different genres too. Okay, here's probably a question for Virginia at Writer Beware. So, which is a great website, which I will put in the recording email too. She lets you know about all these scams and all this other stuff. So someone asked, I didn't know publishers charge fees for copying. I don't know, maybe copywriting she's talking about. I don't know. I thought I could just sign a contract without paying anything and the publisher takes care of everything. But I've had two publishers who told me they charge fees. Is this normal, or are they both poor publishers?
Yeah, it's not normal. Traditional publishers don't charge you fees, period. There are like some tiny, tiny exceptions, and they would be spelled out in the contract. If you had an agent, they would know they were normal. Things like for example, with university presses where your book requires an index, they might put that on you, the author, to either do the index yourself, which I don't recommend, or you end up paying for an indexer. And they can either recommend them to you or you can hire your own. I don't know why that's become kind of a standard operating procedure for nonfiction, but that's even the way it worked at the publisher I worked at, and it wasn't an academic press. And then permissions fees are the other one. So if you are using someone else's material in your book and it's beyond fair use, that means you have to ask permission to use it and you might be charged a fee. The publisher will not pay for that unless you negotiate it in the contract, because they know how significant those fees can be. And the other thing that potentially you might have to pay for is artwork, but it would really depend on the book, right? So there are some books where the publisher is going to add illustrations and things to make the book lively and user friendly. They're not going to charge you for that if it's part of their own design process. But if you're like doing this coffee table book of like the Grand Canyon and it's based on the photography that you've taken over the years, yeah, the publisher's not paying for your camera and for your film and all that. That's on you. So those are the exceptions. But when I hear publisher charging me fees, that's not what I think of. I think of, oh, we are charging you to publish. And that's pretty much in the realm of you're either dealing with a service, a publishing service, not a traditional publisher, or some sort of a hybrid publisher.
Yeah. And just do a quick little explanation of hybrid publishers for people who may not be familiar.
Oh, that's a loaded question. Okay.
There's probably a blog post about that.
There is.
I'll find it. Don't worry.
So hybrid publishing is relatively new in the history of publishing. Okay. So I would say it emerged in the early 2010s. And I feel like part of the reason it emerged was that it was trying to get away from the old school vanity publisher stigma, where these companies would take anyone, everyone, everything, anyone who could pay and put it out there. And often the poor author would end up with like 1,000 books in their garage, because it would often require you to do a print run and then they would ship you the books and you never sold anything. That's kind of like the old stereotype of the vanity publisher. So this new generation of publishing service companies came into being that actually were doing the job of what I would consider to be a traditional publisher. They actually had distribution into bookstores, and maybe they could help you do a display at the airport bookstore, or, like they actually had some industry credibility, often staffed by people from the traditional publishers. So an example would be She Writes Press or Greenleaf Book Group, which have both been around for like more than 10 years. But the thing is, if you look at the business model of a hybrid publisher and the so-called vanity publisher, it's the same. They don't survive unless the author pays for publication. It's the people who can pay who are going to get published, and the fees can be really significant. So it's really people with some extra cash lying around that can afford the hybrid. I would say if it's a good hybrid, you're looking at minimum $10,000, really more in the 20,000 ballpark if they're actually carrying out what we would consider to be a traditional publishing function, which is why people want to use a hybrid, because they think they're getting the best of both worlds. But I mean, in my honest opinion, I think it can be the worst, just because it's so hard to make any money once you're paying those sorts of fees, and you're not even earning 100% net. The hybrid publisher is taking a significant cut. Like they might only pay you a 25% royalty on print sales, which, yes, that's more than a traditional publisher, but you know how many copies you have to sell to earn out a $20,000 fee that you paid. So this is why self-publishing authors think it's really foolish for people to pay for hybrid publishing, but people have their reasons. There are valid reasons to do it, but you've got to have money to play the game.
That's a lot. Okay, so somebody asked a question. I think this is a great one. To attract potential readers, can I post small excerpts of my book on social media before it's even picked up by an agent or a publisher? And would that hurt their chances of potentially being picked up if some of their book has already been released?
Yeah, sure, you can do that. It's probably not going to make a bit of difference, to be honest. I think people are fearful that if they place their work before book publication, it will dampen a publisher's interest. Often it's the reverse that happens. You do something on social media or Substack or on a podcast or YouTube, it takes off, and then everyone's at your door saying, do you have a book? Do you have a book? We want to make money off this crazy viral thing that you did. So no, it doesn't hurt your chances, but it's just like, imagine you start, I think posting on social media is not really any different from just having a website with a blog where you start posting chapters of your book. Who's going to know it's there? And does anyone really want to read it on your blog or on social media? So it feels to me like spinning your wheels or hoping for a lightning strike. And unless you have something interesting to say on social media, I don't know that you're going to get attention. And like I said, I don't go to social media to read excerpts from people's books. Do you?
Yeah. No, I don't. There's a thing in the screenwriting world. People sometimes will post their first page of their script. I don't know how.
Okay.
I don't know how productive it is. I have no idea if anyone's ever gotten approached by anyone from it. But we'll have to post that question out to our audience and see, has it ever worked for you? So a couple people have thumbs up this question. You're not a simple question, but it's never a simple question. What's your number one tip for approaching writing as a business?
I should be able to answer this question really quickly, given that I just revised my book called The Business of Being a Writer. Part of it is like acknowledging, one, you are entering a business. You are, whether you like it or not, but the book publishing industry still runs on the capitalist system, and there has to be some level of acceptance of that or recognition if you don't accept, and that every writer needs a business model. That's not necessarily a tip, but again, I think so much of this is about mindset. So I think often writers come to the business of publishing or the business of writing with a lot of bad, terrible baggage. They have these myths that have been instilled in them. And I don't use myths in a pejorative way. I just mean like cultural myths that you've adopted without even realizing it. That, for instance, that art and business do not get along, that they're antithetical to one another, and you can't make them dance, or that you are selling out if you put money before art, or if you even think about having a business model, or that it is somehow going to damage your art if you care about your readers or engage with the readership. So you see these behaviors a lot, particularly in the MFA and the literary community. And certainly I held on to some of these beliefs myself because I went through that very traditional path, like a creative writing program, academic programs. I was taught by professors who who are terrible at the business. So who do you learn it from? And often it's no one that you meet in school. It's you kind of piece it together. So I would say the first steps are acknowledging you are going to be a business person, and then taking tangible actions that reflect that understanding. Like, okay, I'm going to set up accounting now that tracks all of my expenses related to my pursuit of this career, even if I'm not making money, so I can see what I'm spending. Or I'm going to set up a spreadsheet that shows all of the pitches or queries or whatever it is that I've sent, the responses I've received, and I'm going to start to track my success rate over time. Or I'm going to add up how much money I made, even if I don't feel like I'm making, even if it's only like $3.72, like tracking it. And I think those are some of the first steps that help you understand that there are things that can be measured. And if you don't start measuring them now, you might not actually see the progress that you are in fact making, and understand when it's time to formalize some things, like have a separate bank account, have a business credit card, et cetera.
And I think that's one of the things I have learned a lot from you about is data and stats and analyzing things. And you turned me on to this Kalytics, where he gives these reports and about your genre and all different genres, and what's selling, what isn't selling, and it's fantastic. So when you're looking at all this data, which is also, by the way, the hot sheet, I'm going to definitely link to that because it's a fantastic newsletter that Jane puts out, a publication that lets you know everything that's going on in the publishing industry, really hot topics and things that are going on. It's great. But when you're looking at all this data and you started collecting all this to report to us, to help all the writers out there, what's the thing that like surprises you the most as you're looking at all of this information, that and maybe some things that you've seen change the most over the years?
Self-publishing authors have the potential to create market demand, and they can take advantage of trends more quickly than traditional publishers. And they have the potential to profit in really significant ways that I think are just now starting to be understood. I think the traditional publishing industry for years still underestimates what's happening in the self-publishing market. And partly that's because there's no industry statistics surrounding it. Kalytics, I'm glad you brought that up, is one of the few places where you can get a sense of just how much is happening in this market, how rich it is, how complex, the money involved, and how you can, on a graph, kind of plot what reader interest is down to the trope level. And you can use
so
that.
Detailed.
Yeah, you can use that to help you plan your series or your next book if you're willing to consider the market as you produce work. The other thing that's happened is, I think, because of the media fragmentation we've experienced, in addition to media consolidation, like there are fewer outlets now that cover books, that review books. Obviously, there's social media. We don't all pay attention to the same media outlets. We're very splintered in that way. That's what I mean by fragmentation. So a New York Times book review doesn't sell a book the way it used to when I first entered the business, and they've even admitted as much. And the same is true of any major media outlet. So this has reduced the power of the traditional publisher significantly. As if you're an author looking at your options, what can a traditional publisher do for you that you can't do for yourself? The list is getting pretty small. They can get you onto the New York Times list because they still have fantastic relationships with insiders, tastemakers, influencers, people like at the bookstore level, at the library level, the people who make recommendations of books. They can still spread the word effectively before a book comes out. They can invest in advanced reading copies and pre-order campaigns. They have a connection to the Reese Witherspoon Book Club, yada, yada. So they can still do that sort of thing, but for how many books a year? Not that many. And so you have to get really crystal clear as an author, given, I think, the reduced power of publishers, of what it is you think they're going to do for your book. And if you want a really great exhibit of what's happening in this regard, look at Authors Equity. So this is a publishing company that was just launched this year by the former CEO of Penguin Random House. Look at the name of the company, Authors Equity. It's funded by authors. It's funded by Tim Ferriss, James Clear of Atomic Habits, Louise Penny. These are authors who have power to attract a readership. They don't need a publisher anymore. And now they're like, okay, we're going to form a company that publishes us the way we want, and we're going to take the lion's share of the profits. Source Books is another publishing company. It's partly owned by Penguin Random House, FYI, that is starting to do more equitable arrangements with authors, both traditionally published authors and self-published authors. If you look at some of the best-selling authors right now, like Anna Huang, Frida McFadden, they have deals where they've hung on to their digital rights, ebook rights, audiobook rights in some cases, and then they're using source books to help them break out in ways that are very hard for self-publishing authors, like at a mass market retail level. So source books is able to get the print edition into your Targets and your Walmarts, and they're able to help facilitate global distribution and translation deals. So I think we're starting to see how authors, if they are business oriented, if they do see this as, I am making strategic decisions that benefit me, and I am not looking for publishers' approval. I'm not looking for the publisher to validate me. I'm looking for the publisher to partner with me to increase my reach, if that's my goal, to get on the New York Times bestseller list, if that's my goal. And, I did in the hot sheet, I did a really, I think, a really great piece talking with the Sourcebooks team about the mind shift they went through and thinking about how they work with authors and recognizing that in so many cases, especially if the author already has a level of success, the author knows more than the publisher on what their readers want, how their readers behave, and what's next for the career. So I think authors underestimate themselves constantly in relation to publisher knowledge.
I saw that press release that came out when Authors Equity first came out. I've got to find that hot sheet, the old hot sheet that you wrote that in. So I want to also talk about something that when you talk about, authors underestimating themselves, and, that building their platform is something that you've spoken about a lot, and even building email lists and all of that, and also Substack. So Lucy posed a question early on. I've been using MailChimp for years, but I don't send it out very often. So it's pretty expensive. But I like being able to design the page, make it, make her newsletter look the way she wants it to look. For me, Substack looks deadly, not inviting. I have just shortened notes and things, not long blogs. Is there any other choice that's less expensive and offers lots, including that design capability, that you're familiar with?
I would look at MailerLite. So that's very comparable to MailChimp, but it's cheaper. And I haven't used it myself, so I can't 100% say it's going to work for whatever design ideas you have or whatever it is you're doing in MailChimp. But my impression from the way it's used is that you could do comparable designs there. I agree that Substack, it does some things wonderfully, like marketing and promoting your work. It's hard to beat that functionality, but everyone's Substack does look identical.
Yeah. Oh, somebody asked about writing coaches. I seem to see more and more of them popping up. It's probably a subjective question about whether they're helpful or not. If it helps people get away from that overthinking or over editing. Right.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons you're seeing more coaches is that there are a couple of really popular programs right now that train people to be writing coaches. And this is part of a larger trend, not just in writing and publishing. I think there was a New York Times piece warning people about coaching programs. That is not how I feel about writing and publishing coaches, by the way, but it is part of this is the zeitgeist, right? You have a coach now. Author Accelerator is the program I'm most familiar with, and I often have those folks who are guests at my blog, writing craft and technique pieces, which are fantastic. I can say they're getting trained really well because they know their stuff. But whether or not you need a coach is so subjective. Please do not feel left out or feel like you need to have one. Now, Author Accelerator, I can only speak for their program, but the way they think about coaching is more than how I think about coaching. They think about coaching as something that also involves editing on the page. But when I talk about coaching more broadly, not as part of their program, I think of a coach as someone who's addressing internal issues, psychological issues, things that aren't necessarily related to what's happening in the manuscript, but things that you need to talk through, or you need accountability, or you're blocked, and really you need someone to bounce something off of. You need someone to be able to call you on your shit, that sort of thing. I think you hire an editor when you need someone to work with you without much sentimentality, and probably without a whole lot of care for your psychological safety. Work on the manuscript to get it into shape. Now, that said, there are so many jokes, aren't there, about editors as well as agents becoming writers' therapists, and there's a reason for that, because writing is such intensely personal work. So I do think some editors end up having to try and handhold their clients, but it just depends.
Maybe an editor could go get you a writing therapist. Talk to them about your therapy problems. Talk to me about your editing. Okay, so I know you've spoken a lot about memoir writing. So Kay asked what advice do you have for memoir writers to get published?
It's a tough market right now. I'm not going to beat around the bush. So what I'm seeing is you need to either have the proverbial platform that attracts agents and publishers, which sadly most writers are not going to have, or you need to be producing something that really has a great hook, twist, angle, the high concept, something that speaks to an issue that gets a lot of media attention right now. And this is where I would really encourage you, if you are writing a memoir, look at those deals in Publishers Marketplace. Please, please, please look at those deals so you can understand what memoir is actually selling in the traditional market. And I can give you a little bit of a head start. This is a post that I co-authored with Allison K. Williams. It's called The Hard Sell, about where I looked at memoir deals for I think the first few months of the year, and I pulled out the qualities of what was selling, and like, look at who the people are, or look at the sort of storyline that's in there. And I'll just share a couple of these. So, for example, the creative director of The Atlantic, the magazine, he gets a memoir deal. He's already published a book, and it's about severe depression, and it's with a small press. We also have a memoir by an actor on the Game of Thrones who is also a DJ. We've got a memoir and essays by a Black lesbian author who is a MacDowell Fellow. Here's a memoir by someone who doesn't have, like, they're not the MacDowell Fellow, they're not on This American Life, they're not the Atlantic director, but they were born with 15 birth defects and somehow survived. So I hope that paints the picture of it has to stand out. It can't just be my 60 years of life as a nurse. It has to have a quality that will get media attention.
Yeah. No offense to nurses out there.
No.
Yeah, no, of course not. Adding on to that question about the memoir, is there, let's just pretend this person is fascinating. It has a very interesting,
Yes.
maybe she has 17 birth defects. I mean, she's going to up this bar. So what is the optimal word count for memoir to get a smidge more leeway if it's a researched or hybrid memoir?
I mean, partly I'm assuming if you're going to sell the memoir, it's probably going to have some sort of researched component or some component that makes it more attractive. I just did a class with Courtney Mom on this, someone who has written hybrid memoir, and her position, I don't know if I would take this strong of a position, but I think her position is, look, your memoir won't sell unless it's hybrid. And she just calls hybrid memoir, as do most agents and editors. But there has to be, it can't just be the straight story of your life unless you are that fascinating birth defect woman or gentleman. As far as length, we're really looking at something that's probably between 60 and 80,000 words. You might be able to get away with 40 to 50,000. It's going to depend on the publisher. People will step back if it's more than 100,000 words because they'll think that you haven't really edited it down to where it should be.
Yeah. Or that it's a sci-fi memoir. So I'm not sure how much you know about the
Did you say graphic
um,
novel?
graphic novel.
A,
Someone
a
was
tiny bit.
okay. So somebody's asking about finding a decent artist to collaborate with on the project.
Yeah.
If you have any idea about advice on publishing a graphic novel as an unknown writer.
I don't, but I do have an article that a graphic novelist did that talks about getting an agent for a graphic novel that might have at least a few tips for you. So let me put that into the chat. I mean, the positive thing I would like to say is that the big publishers have started getting more into the adult graphic novel and comic space. It has been an area of growth for years now. So just as a word of encouragement, whatever trouble it might take to find a collaborator, maybe it is indeed worth the trouble, especially if you're looking at the comps, right? You have to understand
Mm-hmm.
what's currently selling in that space.
And we actually had, and I will drop a link, we actually had a free graphic novel panel last week
Oh,
on
great.
Symposium. So there's a link there with somebody who has a graphic novel with DC. So check that out. Yeah, it's a very interesting space and can be extremely expensive to create graphic novels for the writer to hire an artist and all of that. But watch that, and they go to deep dive into that. I want to ask a question about nonfiction. How do you select an appropriate genre for the nonfiction? I've called my book narrative nonfiction because it is a journalistic deep dive of interviews of people who have transformed their lives through partner dance, as well as professionals describing the science behind those changes. It is all connected by my own story and is arranged in 5 thematic sections. However, the story topics fit other genres like lifestyle, health and wellness, self improvement. Do I call it narrative nonfiction or select a topic area like health or lifestyle? What will be the most attention for agents? I know it's a very specific question, but maybe just speak about like the genre of nonfiction.
I like to talk about nonfiction in terms of two broad categories. So there's the narrative nonfiction, which would include memoir. And these are books that tell a story from beginning to end with using fiction techniques. So, like The Wager would be like a really great example of a best-selling narrative nonfiction book, or Seabiscuit, if I reach back even further. Then you have what I call the benefit oriented books, the books that people use to improve their lives. I like to use the word prescriptive. They often have lessons, secrets, systems, processes that you're going to follow. And this is where people are going to a book to solve a problem. And this book, if done well, is going to bring them more success, more love, more money, health, etc. Now, to sit on the self-help shelf or the health and fitness or sex, relationships, or cooking, you actually have to offer prescriptive advice. You like there has to be something in there that's going to help people do it. They're not reading it for the great story. They're reading it to take something benefit oriented away. With narrative nonfiction, you typically don't spell things out, even if there are lessons or morals or whatever. You typically aren't telling people what to do next with the information. And it's usually it's more about, you would read a narrative nonfiction book for the same reason that you might read a novel. You just love a great story, or the topic is fascinating, the people are fascinating. It's always a struggle when authors are trying to meld these two things together. I think you'll have a hard time figuring out the book structure, because I think it's hard to write a book, a narrative nonfiction book, while you're trying to cram in the benefit oriented stuff, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
You have to think about what's the spine here. What are you building on? There are books that do both, but you are setting up a challenge for yourself. Again, the best thing I could recommend is look at comps and see. Usually there's not a narrative nonfiction shelf in the store, so that's going to benefit you. Usually these books get shelved based on the primary topic or audience or readership they're addressing. So, there's a history shelf. There's the current events shelf, the politics shelf. So you will have to figure out where does the book naturally fit unfortunately, I can't tell you without seeing like the manuscript and a whole lot of other materials.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about feedback from agents and responses from agents from your query. Somebody asked, what if you got feedback from an agent and then life pulled you in another direction? What's the best way to follow up? Like after an extended period of time that might have gone by, is there ever a sort of expiration date on when you can say,
Did,
remember
did,
me?
did this person mention how much time had elapsed?
No, did not.
If it's been like a year or two, maybe 3, I would say go ahead and follow up. And you can say, life pulled me in another direction. You don't have to be more specific than that. But now I've come back to the project and I would like to continue if you're still interested. I think that's totally acceptable. But once you're like getting past the 5-year mark, we run into the problem of whatever appealed to that agent at that time is probably past. You can try, like nothing bad's going to happen if you try. I just wouldn't necessarily expect them to respond. Or they may say thanks, but no thanks.
Yeah. Nobody ever died hearing no. Is it better to write, like for your debut novel, is it better to write a standalone book or something that's part of a series?
Oh, there's no right answer. You should do what fits the work, but obviously there are certain genres that benefit from being in a series. Usually the more commercial genre, fiction-oriented areas, romantasy, for example. But it's really that's up to the author.
This is a question probably a lot of people have because it seems like when you say romantasy, like every time you turn around, there's a new genre coming out, new names, figure out what is this. I'm chaos. I'm having a hard time defining the genre of my manuscript. Is it's a mystery / suspense, but has paranormal and speculative elements involving a curse and an occult and folklore, plus some historical fiction. Is it safe to call it upmarket or pick one genre and stick with it despite my comps taking elements of one horror book and one mystery book?
I mean, if it's truly a situation where you can't do justice to what the book is by choosing one or two of those descriptors, then I would rely on your comps to convey what the book really is. So you can say it has the tone of this such and such book by so and so, and it has the sort of thrilling plot of blah blah blah. And so you can at least, when you mention the comp, make sure you indicate why you're using that comp, what element you're comparing.
There's some very specific questions. I'm trying to find ones that will appeal to multiple people. Here's one. I'm laughing because we're book pipeline. Are there novel contests that unpublished authors can enter, and would it make a difference to agents and publishing houses? Besides book pipeline, of course. Because there's a lot of contests out there, so it's hard for people to tell, like, what are some of the red flags maybe that people should be aware of when entering contests, and any kind of thoughts you have about that.
So I would say contests tend to be most beneficial for people in the more literary space, like for poems and short stories, and when they're run by university presses or small presses, although they may be used as a way to help fund the press. So I wouldn't say that's a red flag, but you have to recognize that's the game being played there, because there can be pretty steep fees for submitting to these contests. I think they become less beneficial when they're run by basically as a profit center. And you can tell by whoever's running the contest, usually if this is a for-profit business that's running it, or is it a publisher, or is it a university, is it a small press? So think about who's pocketing the money, and if it's really used to facilitate the contest or to profit the people running it. Like I say this as someone who worked for Writer's Digest, and we had a contests or competitions department responsible for running competitions across multiple types of magazines and brands. And Writer's Digest made, at its peak while I was there, like more than $1 million a year in competition fees. And that was like 80% profit. And I'm not saying that they were ripping off writers, but people run contests to make money, and you have to recognize that. So it's really a small selection of contests that actually can do you any good. whether that's Pipeline, whether it's, the more literary places that I mentioned, like AWP would be a classic example of a really great competition to enter. That said, I don't think it's wrong to enter them, but you have to really watch the money that you're putting in, because usually the reward is limited.
And also too, I'm going to drop the link right here because we're going to have another free panel where we're going to talk about book contests and as the people who read for them, like advice that we have, and to hopefully manage expectations and also be very transparent about the kinds of stuff that help you stand out. So that's coming up later this month. Since you've done some work with university presses, any advice on how to get into textbook or curriculum publishing? They have education publishing background.
Yeah, educational publishing is almost like a different industry. It's not comparable to proposing, in my mind, books at a commercial publisher or pitching an agent, because they just have very specific requirements. And it usually involves companies that I have no insight into. So like I'm thinking here of like Pearson or McGraw-Hill or Taylor and Francis and other places. And they also just run by sort of different standards. Like in some cases, these publishers take copyright. And professors might do them for reasons that are pretty have zero to do with business. It's about tenure, or it's about being a thought leader, or any other number of status and prestige related rewards. So all that to say, I don't have any I don't have any useful advice to offer for people pursuing educational publishers. Good luck.
We're going to start wrapping up, but I want to ask you about agents and, maybe some things that because you've got many agents in your network, some things that maybe they would like authors to know about working with them, how to be a great client, how to know like when maybe it's time to divorce your agent.
I think what authors sometimes don't know about agents is that they are all so different from one another, and there is no such thing as normal with an agent. And so that makes it really hard to advise on what you should do. It's like trying to advise someone on a marriage when you can only see in through a window, or like the peephole. Like you don't get to go inside the house and look in all the drawers and the closets where people are hiding the bad stuff, So it's really hard to tell people, yes, it's time. I think the best way to approach the agent relationship is to be really honest with yourself at the outset about how much an agent can do for you. And often it's not much beyond sell the book to the right place. And they're invaluable for that. And they should also obviously negotiate the best contract. And they're typically going to get paid. All the money that they're going to see is typically going to come from that advance. About 70 to 80% of books don't earn out their advance. So they're trying to get as much money up front as they can. And then once the book is out and published and, they've gone through that process with you, they don't have that much of a role until you have something else to sell. Or they could be facilitating rights deals for your other books, of course. So all of that to preface, hopefully before you sign with an agent, you figure out what their communication style is. Like, do they want to text? Do they want to call? Do they want to email? Figure out what it is. Are you going to be able to communicate effectively if you're already having problems, if you're already feeling like you're not getting sufficient attention and you haven't even signed with them? Like if you're already waiting weeks or months to hear back from them, and you don't know what the status is and you're afraid to follow up, like that's not setting you up for a good agent author relationship. So a lot of the problems that I see occur are seeded very early in the process because the author is too scared to ask a question and mess up the relationship, which is not going to happen. So you need to figure out upfront, you need to ask all your questions up front, not be afraid of the agent and not be afraid of stepping away when you realize that partnership is no longer serving your needs and it could be for a million different reasons. It could be that the agent is just never communicating with you at this point because they're not interested in your projects anymore, which sadly happens. There's so many metaphors or analogies here with marriage, so many, but the relationship can cool. And it's no one's fault. You've grown apart, and it's just time.
Irreconcilable differences.
And it's just time to go. What makes me sad is when authors stick with agents for far longer than they should because they fear they will never be able to get another one, or it's better to hang on to the one that you have. But like to me, it feels like staying in an abusive relationship. It's not that the agent is trying to be abusive, at least I don't think so. It's just that they've got too much on their plate. They don't care anymore. Agents don't typically fire their clients. You know what? Sometimes they're not good business people.
Yeah.
Period.
And I also feel like we talk about this all the time, that it's better to not have an agent than to be with the wrong agent. Like in screenwriting, it's the same way. People just want that manager and they think, oh, I'm repped now, everything is going to be great, but you still have to do so much work, incredible amount of work, probably more work than you did before you were repped. And also too, if you're with the wrong one, you're not available for the right one when they come around. Trust your spidey senses. And I want to ask you this one last question, which is probably a depressing question to end on, but I'm hoping you can spin it into something positive and uplifting. Okay? Here's your test, Jane, to see how wonderful you really are. Because we had this conversation recently and we were going to have a symposium about this topic. So I want to present it to you here. How do you counsel people who wonder what the point is when considering how bad the odds are and the dubious results in getting published? Do you ever advise people to walk away if the reality just isn't what they were prepared for, or is it mutually worth it? Therapist hat, Jane. Is it too late in the day for this question?
I do have an answer. Okay. So if you're in it just to be anointed, no, it is not worth it. The happiness you feel from that moment of acceptance or validation from whomever it is that you're waiting for, that does not last long enough to make it worth it. No. However, if you are someone who takes great satisfaction in writing, in that creative activity, if you could not really stop, if you even tried, if someone actively has discouraged you and you couldn't stop, this often happens when you're in school with really mean professors or teachers. They'll say, you'll never be a writer. You're not talented enough. If that gives you the motivation, the drive, or the grit, the resilience to say, I'm going to prove that person wrong, it will be worth it. So ultimately what I'm saying is you have to enjoy the creative act for its own self for it to be worth it. If you're waiting for that external whatever to happen, I think you're going to continue to be disappointed. It certainly helps if you can roll with the ups and downs, because there are going to be so many in a career. And I have seen some authors with really insanely bad down periods, and it doesn't seem like they can catch a break. But I think it helps if, one, you can try and put a new frame on what's happening, which is really hard. But the book I would recommend for that is called The Art of Possibility. I actually mentioned this in my book. The Art of Possibility by Benjamin and Rosamund Zander is really good for thinking about, how can I change the framing of this so that I'm not depressed, and asking if it's worth it. And then the other thing to do, am I going to remember what it is? Yeah, I think I lost my thread.
That's okay. But you should follow Jane on Threads. I feel the same way. I feel like it's you have to really, really, really love writing. And as long as you love writing, it's about the journey of it. It's about doing what you love. And people are going to find different levels of success in that. But if you've spent that time in your day, whatever time it is you grace yourself with to put towards this passion, and you really enjoyed it, and that adrenaline rush you get when you write something, and I mean, that's why you're doing it. It's not, it's very hard to make a living as a writer. So if you don't do it for love, what's the point? You thought of it? Your thought?
I thought of it, yeah. So the second thing to do is think of yourself as a lucky person. And that's another mindset shift. I think there are some people who are, let's say, the Eeyore personality, and they just can't get away from seeing only the negative things that are occurring. And part of this actually goes back to the art of possibility too, putting the new frame on it. But they've done studies that show if you consider yourself a lucky person, if you're able to flip that switch, you will see the opportunities that have been in front of you all along that you've been ignoring because you're too focused on this thing that's not working out and you're angry about it and frustrated. So again, it goes back to mindset issues. For me, it's the longer that I'm in the business, the more I realize success is really dependent on whether you can get through these psychological barriers or traps or self-sabotage that occur all the time, whether it's the comparison trap or something else. So The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield is good for that. Go read that.
Yeah. And also too, when you go to writing conferences and you see these authors who are your favorite authors and you've read all their books and then you see them sitting at the bar talking to their friends, you realize they are just like you. You know, they have insecurities, they've struggled. This didn't just magically happen for them. I think sometimes that puts you in a space of understanding the big picture. And also they're just fun. You should definitely go to writers' conferences. You get excited and very inspired at the end. But speaking of inspiration, Jane, as always, you have been a great inspiration, not just to me personally, but to the whole writing community. And cannot thank you enough for joining us tonight on this special symposium, sold out symposium. So we're very excited. And everyone, I'm going to get this. I've been keeping notes throughout this. And I'm going to have a gigantic list of resources for you to dive into with a recording email. So thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. And thank you so much, Jane. Again, I see a lot of little
hearts.
Emojis popping up. I didn't even know that it could do that. I'm learning something new today. Oh my gosh. You guys are great. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Thanks for joining me. Thank you, Jeannie.
Symposium is brought to you by Pipeline Artists, a division of Pipeline Media Group. To learn more about upcoming live symposiums, visit symposium.pipelineartists.com and follow us on Twitter @PipelineArtists.